Today we'll begin a Maimer from Tafshin Yud Beis, because we did already the Maimer from Tafshin Yud Aleph. 1952, Shabbos Mevarchim Menachem Av, which was also like this year, Shabbos Parshas Matos and Masei. The Maimer talks about Arim Miklat, which is a very important thing in general, and specifically, as we know, we're awaiting or we're anticipating the coming of Mashiach. And when Mashiach comes, one of the important things that's added in the time of Mashiach is the 3 extra Arei Miklat. There'll be 3 added cities of refuge. The Rambam, when the Rambam brings the proof from the Torah, where we see the concept of Mashiach in the Torah, which is a result, if someone doesn't believe in Mashiach, so he's denying the entire Torah and Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Rambam brings the psukim in the Torah that talk about the coming of Mashiach, and then the Rambam says, Af ba'arei miklat u'emer. By Arei Miklat, it also says when the Torah speaks about the cities of refuge, which is a few places in the Torah, but specifically this week's Parsha, in Parshas Masei, where it talks about the cities of refuge, and speaking about someone who kills someone else, b'shoigeg, by mistake, unintentionally, he has to run away to an Ir Miklat, he has to run to a city of refuge so that the Goyal Adam, the relative of the person, doesn't reach him, because the relative of the person, if he's outside of Ir Miklat, is allowed to kill him. Now when Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to set aside Arei Miklat, he told him there should be 6 Arei Miklat, 6 cities of refuge, 3 in Eretz Yisrael, and 3 in Ever HaYarden on the other side of the Yarden. And he told him also that Ki Yarchiv Hashem Elokecha Gvulcha, when Hashem will broaden your borders, and He'll give you more lands, which is explained as meaning that in our time, Eretz Yisrael consists of the land of the 7 nations. But when Hashem broadens your borders, then you'll have also the lands of the other 3 nations. So that's the land of the 10 nations. Then you should add another 3 Arei Miklat, another 3 cities of refuge. Now the Rambam says this never happened, and Hashem doesn't give a mitzvah for something that never happens. Which means Hashem could give a mitzvah if so-and-so happens, and so-and-so happens, even if this thing doesn't happen, like the Gemara talks about that according to one opinion never happened. But that means there is a mitzvah of making a Ben Seder Umayra if these situation happen. But in Yashav Hashem Elokecha Gvulcha, the Chachamim say doesn't mean if, but when. Which means that it must be that there will come a time that Hashem will broaden the borders. When will that be? In the time of Mashiach. Which Chassidus explains it also in depth. The concept of now we're connecting more to the midos, the emotional attributes. Our avodah is more in a way of midos, whereas in the time of Mashiach there'll be 10, not just the 7 emotional attributes, but also the 3 moichin, the intellectual wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which are things that we can't relate to properly. In today's day, we only use it in order to inspire our emotions, whereas when Mashiach comes, we'll have these 3 aspects on their own, the 3 intellectual aspects. That's the concept of Arei Miklat, and that's why it's such an important thing. It has to do with the coming of Mashiach. Now, the Rebbe explains in the Maimer that it says in the Medrash Rabbah on the pasuk of when Hashem says "V'kritem lachem arim arei miklat tiyenu," you should set aside cities of refuge, and v'nas shama reitzeach makei nefesh b'shgaga, a reitzeach, a murderer who killed someone unintentionally, should run there to the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge. So the Medrash says the following. The pasuk says, "Toiv v'yasher Hashem al kei yorech hatoim badarech." Hashem is good and straight, and therefore He shows sinners the proper path. And we continue to say, "Zechai rachamecha Hashem," that David HaMelech said, "Remember your mercy, Hashem, and your kindness, v'chasadecha ki mi'olam heima," because it's always been. And the Medrash explains the following. David HaMelech said to Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, had it not been, Me'olam, back in the beginning of the world, in the beginning of creation, had it not been that your kindness first gave Adam HaRishon a way to get out of punishment, he would never be able to stand, he would never be able to withstand, there would never be a future for the world and for the human race. Why? Because in the Torah it says, B'yoyim acholcha mimenu mois tamus. In the Torah it says, the day that you'll eat from Eitz Hadas, from the tree of knowledge, then you'll die. And yet, Hashem says, David HaMelech, you didn't do this to Adam HaRishon. You didn't cause him to die. Rather, instead, you chased him out of Gan Eden, you sent him out of Gan Eden, which is similar to the idea of the city of refuge. Yoyrech Hatoim Badarech, you showed him a way to save himself, and he was able to live another 930 years. Why? Because you chased him out of Gan Eden. Instead of, you sent him into an Ir Miklat, into the city of refuge, by sending him out of Gan Eden. Why was he sent out of Gan Eden, continues the Medrash to say? Because he brought death upon all the future generations. In other words, that Adam HaRishon was now considered to be like a Ritzeach, like a murderer. But in essence, he didn't do it unintentionally, he did it intentionally. And someone who murders intentionally gets killed. And nevertheless, you didn't look at him as someone who murders intentionally. You judged him as someone who murdered unintentionally. And therefore you had mercy on him and you allowed him to run to Amir Mikla, to just be sent into Galus, to be exiled, rather than having to be killed. That is what David HaMelech said to Hashem. And why is this? Because Me'olam Hema, in the beginning of creation, in the beginning of the world, there was the revelation of your kindness and mercy. So now Chassidus explains this idea, that what Adam HaRishon, by eating from Chet Hadas, through the sin that he did, he was like a murderer, like someone who killed. Hashem showed kindness and mercy to him, by judging him as an unintentional murderer and therefore giving him a way to be saved from having to be killed. Now the Rebbe says that's a very interesting idea, but what does it mean? And so the Rebbe explains the following. In general, in Chassidus it says that Shoifech dam ha'adam ba'adam dama yishafech. The Torah says one who spills the blood of man, his blood will be spilled by man, meaning that the best in the court of law has the obligation to kill a person who kills another person. Now Chassidus explains or quotes what it says in Kabbalah, that Shoifech dam ha'adam ba'adam means any time a person does an Aveda, a person transgresses, commits an Aveda, he's really Shoifech dam ha'adam ba'adam. He's pouring out the blood of the man of Kedusha, which is his godly soul, into the Adam, into the man of Lumas, of Klippa, which is the animal soul. And we'll explain it soon exactly how that works. Starting with the idea that an Aveda, transgression means, also the word Aveda means to go over, to leave one domain and to go into another domain. Aveda means to go away from the Rishus, from the domain of Hashem, and to enter instead the Rishus, the domain of Klippa. Bringing over the Chayis, the sustenance of Kedusha into Klippa instead. Which is also why it says, V'noikev Shem Hashem Mois Yumas, that Kabbalah, in Kabbalah it explains, Noikev Shem Hashem means putting a hole into the name of Hashem. What's that idea? That when a person does an Aveda, it's like he's putting a hole into a vessel, and in order that the what's inside it spills out and is able to go somewhere else, which means it goes from Kedusha into Klippa. Idea is something that we explained also in previous Mamarim, in many of the previous Mamarim that we learned, that the whole purpose of creation is that in essence, in reality, everything is Hashem, everything is Kedusha. The real chayus of the world is Kedusha, the real sustenance of the world is Kedusha. Moreover, more than that is with regards to a Jew, that a Jew has a nefesh alikis, a godly soul which is part of Hashem, that's able to recognize and feel the reality of holiness, which is the reality of the world. Klippa is a shell that covers over the Kedusha. It's not a true existence. And as we'll also learn more of that in the continuation of the Maimer, Klippa covers over and doesn't enable the reality of Kedusha, of the true existence to be felt. When a person does an Aveda, what does that mean? He's now, instead of doing what he's supposed to do, instead of connecting to Kedusha and recognizing that Hashem is the real truth, instead he goes against the will of Hashem, which means he's now Aveda, he's removing the sustenance, which is the reality of Kedusha, and he's instead bringing it over into Klippa. He's giving that chayas, using his sustenance for going against Hashem, which is Klippa. And that's the idea of Shefech Dam Ha'adam Ba'adam. That whenever a person does an Aveda, he's actually, so to speak, giving over the sustenance of Adam, of his real self. He's using his time and his strength and his powers that he should be using to connect to the reality and the truth, and is instead giving it over to the opposite of the truth, the opposite of Kedusha. That's every time a person does an Aveda. Just like this is in every Aveda, it's the same thing also in Chet Eitzadas. Chet Eitzadas was, Hashem told Adam Arishan, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. And Adam Arishan did that, which means he took his chayas, which he should have been used for serving Hashem, for understanding and appreciating truth, and he gave it over instead to the opposite of truth. And the punishment for that is death. And the death by Chet Eitzadas, unlike all other sins, because all other sins is a private, specific sin of one person. Over here it was a general concept, because he was Adam Arishan. He included all the future souls that will be in this world. So the death that he brought was not just upon himself, but upon all future generations as well, because he brought now the chayas of Kedusha into Klippa. And like we explained also earlier, in the last Maimer, that it's not just a punishment, but it's also an outcome. Since he brought the sustenance of Kedusha, of holiness into Klippa, if the person now will live forever, then Klippa will exist forever. So therefore there has to be death, where there's a separation between the body and the soul, so that Kedusha and Klippa can now separate, and then the Klippa can disappear, and the Kedusha can continue. Now the Rebbe continues to say, that's all wonderful, and that all sounds very understandable, that when a person does an Aveda, and especially it's a das, he gave chayas, he's actually Shofech Dam Adam Ba'adam, he's taking away the chayas, the life. He's guilty of murder. But the question is, what are we saying? He's giving chayas to Klippa. Klippa is also an existence that was created by Hashem. Hashem created Klippa as well. He created the shell, even if it's not a true existence, but it's an existence of covering over Kedusha. So why do we say that through the sin, the person gave sustenance to Klippa? Klippa already existed beforehand. And so the Rebbe explains, and this is something which Mitzvah Hashem next time will continue understanding it, is that Klippa really, on its own, should be used in a positive way. What's a Klippa mean? A shell. A shell of a fruit, a peel of a fruit, a shell of a nut is there to protect it. Klippa in its true essence, in its existence on its own, without the person adding chayes, is in itself something which is there to protect the Kedusha. And the Rebbe gives an example of this, and Mitzvah Hashem will continue with this next time, and the example is that there's the idea of Yeshus, that's the worst thing, Yeshus, ego, pride. That's the ultimate klippa. A person feels himself as an existence. But in the beginning, in a sense, a person needs that. Because the first thing that the Yetzer Hara tells a person is, how could you go and serve Hashem? Serving Hashem is such an important and such an amazing thing. You're not worthy of it. So the person needs a little bit of pride to tell himself, no, I can do it. For that he needs a klippa, which means a certain existence in order to push himself to yes, do what he's supposed to do. Later it becomes a problem, and Mr. Hashem, we're going to continue learning more about this next time.